He looked out the window and almost spat out his coffee. Once again, he sighed. Tim slammed his coffee cup and got up. The first time was bad. It was pretty rude the first time, and it affected a lot of people. He took the plans for the renovation and decided to show him how wrong he was. Tim and his wife have wanted what they were building on the property for a long time. They knew that work had to be invested, but everyone had something that needed work, right? They loved the woods in their backyard. It was a lush green forest with lots of wildlife. But then her neighbor bought the house next door. He had just moved in and had already made a comment on the generator Tim had. He said something about it being too loud. Tim needed the generator when the thunderstorms drained their energy, so it remained in a stalemate. But one day, he saw the neighbor's children setting up sports nets in a third of his backyard without his permission. When Tim did the research, he was pleasantly surprised. The children regretted that they had not asked him and that they were very polite. He said he didn't mind if they used his garden as long as he was back and they didn't damage anything. Tim didn't understand the children were so nice compared to their father. Now he felt it necessary to start work on the backyard. He got contractors, landscapers, everything. It was time for the backyard to become special, an oasis. It would cost them a small fortune, but they had saved a long time and planned it forever. He was rearranging his terrace when he heard something strange. Tim peered into his backyard and saw his new neighbor talking to his construction team. He hadn't even spoken to Tim before. He just rolled into the backyard and started barking orders like it was his backyard. He told some crew members to be quiet as they were too loud. Everyone seems dissatisfied. Tim couldn't believe what he was seeing. He marched outside to see what was going on. As he got closer, he could hear much more of the conversation his neighbor was having with the crew. He heard, "No, you're doing it wrong. It should be done that way." The contractor noticed Tim and walked up to him, red with anger. The contractor asked Tim, "This guy says you asked him to come over." He could not believe it. Tim marched to his neighbor to confront him. Things only escalated when his neighbor acted offended and said he was doing him just a favor. He told his neighbor to leave her alone before storming off angrily, but he would be back. The crew wasn't working today, so he felt like he could just relax today and enjoy the weekend. But when he peered out the window, he could see his neighbor inspecting the crew's handicrafts. Tim was trembling with anger. To make matters worse, his neighbor not only looked, he decided he was going to play a more personal role. He picked up the cobblestones that were still embedded in the concrete to look at them before ruthlessly dropping them again. Tim marched up to the neighbors and yelled, "What are you doing?" But before the man could even open his mouth, Tim had more to say. With the mouth of a seaman, he urged his neighbor to get off his property and stay away. The neighbor gave him a nasty sign and then stormed out of his yard. Tim looked at the mess he had left. He knew now that it was time to do something. He called the contractor. "Hey, those trees we wanted to put in, can we move them back?" When he added why, the voice on the other end eagerly agreed. He even offered to call the surveyor and set things up. The new tree line would certainly have a great effect. Not only has Tim moved the trees to the rear of the property, but the living wall has now created a clear and impassable boundary between the two properties. The neighbor came out yelling something over the property line. A few hours later, Tim giggled to himself as he saw his neighbor march up and down the new tree line with a ruler. Then things quickly escalated. The neighbor, unhappy that he had been excluded from the large court he had become used to in his spare time, decided to do everything in his power to annoy Tim. After sniffing up and down for a few minutes, he gave Tim a smug look and pulled out his cell phone. Tim was curious what his daring neighbor was up to, but he didn't have to wonder for long. The next day, the man marched up and down the property line again. And this time, he had brought a city surveyor. The surveyor looked from the blueprints to the new chasm and began to measure, to Tim's great amusement. The surveyor checked and checked the position of the dividing line against the plans and shook his head. Unfortunately for Tim's neighbor, everything seemed to be working. Tim had made sure that the live fence was on its side within the designated 8 inches. Attempting to get Tim on the wrong side of the law, however, only served as a shot over the bow. Now Tim was angry. The original plan was to place a buffer between the generator and the neighbor's property. It was an act of politeness, but since the guy had crossed the line, Tim no longer felt the need to take additional steps to comfort the guy. In fact, he would now actively do everything in his power to annoy him. A few days later, a storm rolled in and the generator started. The loud echoes of machines vibrated between the two houses. Tim spotted Mr. Angry, his face and mouth red, as he stared out the window and couldn't do anything. Tim grinned, pleased with the timing of the storm, and went back to his computer. But as he sat and listened to the satisfying sound of the generator, he had a diabolical idea. Tim rushed out, bought a timer, and attached it to the generator. He set it to start itself weekly and run for an hour. And as Saturday morning rolled around, he was sitting on his porch, listening and waiting, looking at the clock, and could hardly suppress his childlike delight. And as if by magic, the generator started up, on time. He waited 10 minutes and then discovered his neighbor, also on time. Mr. Angry appeared in his pajamas and robe and shook his useless fists in the sky. There is no storm. He yelled over the chasm and the bat, "Turn the damn thing off." "I do weekly tests," replied Tim calmly. "This thing has been playing lately." And with that, he went away grinning. Not only was the job almost done and his backyard finished, but another addition was coming home. To be on the safe side, Tim installed personal surveillance cameras in key locations on his property. There had been no retaliation, but he thought it was safer than sorry. Who knows, the guy might have felt the need to come over and fix his latest electrical installation. Satisfied that he had put his neighbor in his place once and for all, there was only one last thing left to do. Tim decided to share his story on a popular Reddit thread called Petty Revenge, where users post the real stories of retaliation for injustice. He described his neighbor's behavior and then shared what he had done to bring him down. It didn't take long for hundreds of funny comments to come in. "I am a dawn for a family that lives in a wooded area and also has a large generator. When it first went off to do its weekly thing, I thought the kids next door had their dirt bike idling by the window," one user wrote. "The neighbor should have been nicer. It will be a pain for the rest of eternity to listen weekly." Most of the users were deeply satisfied with Tim's story. "Well treated," wrote one. And another, "I am satisfied with this vengeance." However, some users pointed out that the feud between Tim and his neighbor may not end. Many even went so far as to say that Tim's neighbor could be a threat. Many even suggested buying surveillance cameras to gather evidence. But Tim already had cameras installed, so they gave some advice. "This is the kind of situation where I would fear that my new trees might suddenly die due to an angry neighbor," someone said. "He already knows you can see where he was standing next to the pavement. Make sure the new night vision camera is pointed at the trees from a different angle," replied another user. "It doesn't take much to poison a tree, but it won't expect two cameras." In the end, Tim's neighbor never returned the favor and probably learned his lesson. Tim ended the post with a degree. Bottom line, angry neighbor but powerless. I've seen some lovely trees in the backyard, and nothing can stop my generator's symphony if it starts every week to do a status check.